So welcome everyone to Social Security Disability 101. Thanks for joining us today. Just reminding you you're being recorded and we're also running live on Facebook. I am Erica Narducci. I am the incoming program director at Cancer Support Community Delaware, and we're hosting this program today. Taking over for Sean Hebel, who has been the program director here since they opened their doors 24 years ago. And he is retiring on June 1st. So I'm very excited to be here, and it's been kind of a crazy month and not what I thought would happen when I came into this new job, but excited to be here. And if you haven't heard of Cancer Support Community Delaware before, what we do is offer support to cancer patients and their caregivers. We do it through support groups weekly and monthly. We do mind-body stress reduction programs, and we do educational programs, which this is one of those. And we have been since March 18th doing all the normal things we do just through Zoom or through our web page or Facebook Live events. So we're still able to offer yoga, Tai Chi, education like this, and our support groups through Zoom platforms. So thanks for joining us and being part of this today. I also want to thank Marianne. Marianne, just give a wave, yeah. And she actually brought this program to us. We were hoping to do it in-house in April, but that didn't happen. I'm so thankful we've got it going today. And her organization In This Together, Philly Wilmington, offers peer support for breast cancer patients. And we're thankful that many of them are here today. And thank you for your support of us and this partnership and coming to do this. So I'm going to turn it over now to Matthew Baxter. He is a public affairs specialist with the Social Security Administration, and I will let him tell you more about what he does. I'm also going to screen share so you'll be able to see his slides, and he will talk you through the presentation. All right, so Matthew, it's all you.
All right, well, thank you, Erica. My name is Matt Baxter. I am Social Security's Public Affairs Specialist for Delaware, Maryland, and the Eastern Shore of Virginia. I have been with the agency for close to 13 years. The first 7 years, I was a claims specialist in the Wilmington, Delaware field office. So I was the person who was taking disability, retirement, survivors, Medicare claims, et cetera. And I've been in this role for about 6 years now. So I coordinate the agency's outreach and educational efforts throughout my territory. I know some of you are listening outside the territory. I can assure you there is a public affairs specialist in every part of the country. So by all means, I know one of the questions was, how can we reach out to our local Matt Baxter, our local public affairs specialist? What you can do is you can email me or you can call me and you can let me know where you live and say, hey, for instance, I would like to be on this person's email distribution list and get information about Social Security. Or I like to host my own presentation locally. Who should I reach out to? I'll be more than happy to get you in contact with my colleague in your part of the country. I'm going to go ahead and give you my personal contact information now. My work email address is matthew.baxter@ssa.gov. And while we are all working from home right now, the best number to reach me at is 302-450-2292. That is my work phone. We have been closed to the public for about a month and a half, and I know one of the questions you may have is, when will we be reopening to the public? And the honest answer is no one knows this time. At this point, we'll be working from home indefinitely. All services are still available by phone or by internet. So we also have a skeleton shift working in each office. So we are still, looking at pieces of mail and sorting through that, faxes, et cetera. And just be aware of the fact that we are there for you throughout this crisis. I will also tell you, talking about unique issues working from home, I have a cat scratching at my door right now, so just bear with me while I take care of that so we don't have that be an issue on an ongoing basis. Just hold on for 1 second. All right, that's been taken care of. All right, so I just wanted to reassure you, we will still be providing services throughout this pandemic. We'll be paying benefits on time. If you are in the application or appeal process for any form of benefits, We are still reviewing those and making decisions on those. So again, our services continue unabated. It's just that you cannot presently walk into an office and receive service face-to-face, but hopefully you can resume that sooner than later. So with that being said, of course, today's topic is disability, both Social Security and SSI. We'll, again, be covering both of those pretty comprehensively. I would say the first half of this presentation, the first give or take 45 minutes to an hour, we'll be talking about the definition of disability, how Social Security and SSI are different and alike, how you apply, how you appeal for benefits. Then the latter half of the presentation, we focus really for those of you on benefits, what you need to know if you're trying to re-enter the workforce, what the rules are. I know there's a lot of fear out there from folks who are on either Social Security or SSI about the impact of returning to work, what it will have on, in terms of your benefits, as well as the Medicare or Medicaid health insurance that you have. And so commonly people are very fearful of returning to work for that very reason. So hopefully this presentation will help clarify for you the supports we offer, because we really do want you, if you are physically and mentally capable, of trying to return to work in at least a part-time capacity and at the same time maintain your benefits for a period of time. So with no further ado, let's move on to the second slide and just define the difference between the two forms of disability that Social Security offers. One is called Social Security Disability, SSDI, and that eventually comes with Medicare, okay? The other form of disability we offer is SSI, Supplemental Security Income, and very basically, in most states, including my home state of Delaware, if you are approved for SSI benefits, you automatically get Medicaid. That is not the case in every single state, but it is the case in most states. A question I know that I was posed ahead of time is, are these decisions for disability made across the board the same way nationwide, or do different states have different definitions of disability? And I want to reassure you, this is a national program, so regardless of whether you live in Delaware, California, or anywhere in between, your case will be dealt with equally, and the same criteria will apply. All right, so moving on to the next slide. Let's just talk about Medicare and Medicaid briefly, because obviously when you're on disability benefits, you frequently do need health care through the government, because oftentimes you're no longer working. So in many cases you've lost your health insurance through employment. And if you are not covered by a spouse or a domestic partner through their employment, then oftentimes Medicare and Medicaid may be the only thing you have access to outside of the Affordable Care Act, of course. So first of all, let's talk about Medicare. That is the federal health insurance program, primarily for people who are 65 and older. It is the exclusive primary health insurance for nearly all retirees. But also there are folks of all ages receiving Medicare, because as many of you know, after you receive disability, SSDI, Social Security Disability, for 24 consecutive months, you are automatically enrolled into the primary parts of Medicare, which are A, for hospitalization, and B, for medical. So in a nutshell, that is Medicare. Medicaid is different. Medicaid is a state health insurance program for people who have low income and limited resources. In most states, children who get SSI qualify for Medicaid, and in many states, Medicaid comes automatically with SSI eligibility. So while, again, we do make disability determinations the same way across the country, this is one area where there are some differences state by state. So for those of you who do not live in Delaware, you definitely want to check with your social services department. If you are either applying for SSI or you are receiving SSI and you do not yet receive Medicaid, you want to check with social services. Does my SSI award automatically grant me Medicaid, or are there additional requirements in order to secure that Medicaid coverage? All right, moving forward. Now we're going to define Social Security disability, okay? So we're moving on to the next slide here, and then moving directly on to the next slide after that. So we're on slide 5 now, and talking about the definition of disability for an adult. So the Social Security Act defines disability as a person who cannot work due to a severe medical condition that has lasted or is expected to last for at least 1 year or result in death. The person's medical condition must prevent him or her from doing substantial gainful employment, work that he or she did in the past or can do in the present or in the future, and it must prevent that person from adjusting to other work. So again, unlike long-term disability, short-term disability, workers' compensation, VA benefits, we're not just evaluating your ability to return to full-time work in jobs that you've done in the past. Rather, we're asking, despite your medical conditions, is there still some sort of employment that you could successfully maintain, making at least $1,260 gross per month, which is the 2020 definition of substantial gainful employment or activity. So it is a very tough standard to be approved by. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that because many of you, if not all of you, have been through this process, and some of you have had to appeal your decisions in order to eventually get awarded benefits. But that is how we're different from short-term, long-term, workers' comp, et cetera. It's not a matter of can you still work full-time with your conditions. It's a matter of can you still, based on your age, your work experience, your educational background, and the severity of your medical conditions, despite your conditions, are you still capable of making $1,260 gross per month in work? All right, so moving on to the next slide. That's just a little bit more information about substantial gainful activity. You'll notice that we do have a higher threshold for individuals who are blind. Those folks may make $2,110 gross per month. Other important point is that if you are receiving Social Security disability benefits, substantial gainful activity is always going to be a concern because down the road, it's also going to have an impact on the continuation of benefits. If you return to substantial gainful activity, eventually that can interfere with the payment of the SSDI, whereas with SSI, we only look at SGA when we're making a determination. Whether you return to SGA or not does not have a direct impact on the termination or continuation of your benefits. Although, again, for any of you who are familiar with SSI, you know that SSI is a benefit of last resort. So if you do return to work, that in many cases will decrease the amount of SSI benefits we're able to pay you. And we'll get into that in depth in the latter half of this presentation. But for now, just keep in mind, for Social Security disability, SGA is a concept you always have to kind of keep in mind, even when you're collecting benefits. Whereas for SSI, it's only a concept to worry about while an initial decision is being made. All right, so moving on to the next slide. So requirements for getting disability benefits. Again, we're talking about Social Security disability benefits right now. You must meet 2 different earnings tests before we can even evaluate you medically. And you have to pass these non-medical earnings tests before we can send the case along for a medical decision. And some people will not meet these tests, in which case the only thing they'll be able to be considered for is SSI if they have limited income, if they have limited resources. So let's talk about these 2 tests. There's a duration of work test and there's a recent work test. So moving on to the next slide. As you can see on this chart, depending on your age when you become disabled, you have to have worked and paid into the Social Security system for a certain number of years. So under the age of 28, you only have to have 1.5 years of work under our system to have earned potential benefits upon medical approval. But then from there, starting at age 30, you'll notice that you have to have at least 2 years. And then for every year after that, you have to have an extra quarter of work. You have to have an extra, basically 3 months of work. So very critically, when you talk about this test, I want you to notice that once you hit age 43, you do need to have more than 5 years of total work under the Social Security system. And when we move on to the next slide, you'll see why that's important to kind of differentiate that when you reach a certain age, 5 years of work is not necessarily enough to be considered for Social Security disability. Okay, so that's the duration of work test. And in this case, we're just looking at your entire career. You could have done that work years ago. You still will meet the duration of work test as long as you have that number of years of work under the Social Security system. But that's only one test to pass. Then you have to pass the recent work test. So let's move on to the next slide. So how much recent work you need to have had depends upon your age yet again. If you become disabled in or before the quarter you turn 24 years of age, you need to have a year and a half of work, otherwise known as 6 credits, during the 3-year period ending with the quarter you became disabled. So in the past 3 years before becoming disabled as a young person, you had to have been working and paying into the system for half of that period. Now, if you become disabled in the quarter after you turn 24, but before the quarter you turn 31, so if you're between 24 and 30, you must have worked during half the time for the period beginning the quarter after you turn 21 and ending the quarter you became disabled. So you take that total number of quarters, 4 quarters per year, divide it in half, and that's how many quarters you have to have earned through your work to be considered disabled or to be considered for a medical decision. Now, for many of you, if not all of you, you may have become disabled from the time that you turn 31 onwards, and there it's much easier to explain. For anyone who is 31 or older, when you provide us with your potential onset date, the date that you no longer were able to perform substantial gainful activity because of your medical conditions, we do a 10-year look back, and you have to have earned 20 credits during that 10-year period prior to your onset to be considered for Social Security disability. And although it may not apply to any of you, one thing I will share for, let's say, anyone that you care for who may not be disabled now, but may become disabled in the future. This is the reason why folks who are thinking about retiring early, let's say their late 40s or sometime in their 50s or any time really, quite frankly, before they reach early retirement age for Social Security purposes, which is 62. This is the reason to consider in early retirement getting a part-time job where you will continue paying into Social Security. To earn a couple of credits a year, which is all it takes, we're talking about maybe making around $3,000 a year gross before taxes. That's all it takes for an early retiree to keep themselves eligible and entitled for a medical decision. Because the worst case scenario is something like this. You're 54, you retire, you say, I'm never going to work again. You turn 60 and you're diagnosed, let's say, with stage 4 cancer. You come to us and you say, I need to apply for disability. I just was diagnosed with this horrible disease. I need help financially. I have all these new expenses. I'm not 62 yet, so I can't file for your retirement. I know you offer disability. Please take my claim. In that situation, we're going to look back and say, this person only earned 16 credits from age 50 to their onset date at age 60. And even though they may have worked for 30 or 35 years prior to retiring early, they therefore have lost their insured status no matter what the severity of their condition is, and therefore they will not be able to apply. Well, they can apply, but they'll be denied immediately for non-medical reasons, for lack of insured status reasons. So again, this may not apply to any of you, but for anyone you care for, obviously no one can take their health for granted. And if you do know someone who's going to retire early, I would encourage them to get a little part-time job, making a few $1,000s a year. So if this situation arises, they will still be able to be medically considered for the non-reduced, the unreduced disability benefit, because the alternative here for this poor individual who unfortunately has not worked in the 6 years prior to becoming disabled, they're going to ask, well, what can I do? You deny me Social Security disability. Well, we can evaluate them for SSI, but for many folks who retired early, they're financially well off enough, they're not going to qualify for the SSI benefit. They either have a pension or significant investments. So then the only other alternative is to wait until they're 62 and file for early retirement and take a permanent, in many cases, 30% reduction to their benefit moving forward. And depending on the severity of a person's conditions, they may not make it to that early retirement age. So it is crucial for those friends and family members and loved ones who are still working, who are contemplating early retirement, to get a part-time job in retirement to keep themselves insured. If you work up until age 62, then you're golden, because the latest full retirement age for anyone under current legislation is 67. So if you work up until age 62, you will be insured for disability all the way up until your full retirement age of 67. All right, moving on to the next slide. So one of the common questions I received as a claims specialist, and still receive to this day as a public affairs specialist, is when should I apply for disability? A lot of people are under the impression that they should wait a year to apply to kind of prove to us that they've been incapable of working for that past year because they know what our criteria is. But that's not the right way of looking at it. Really, we encourage you to apply as soon as you become disabled, because based on your medical records and feedback from medical professionals, we're going to evaluate and project out a year from your onset date whether it is likely you'll be able to return to work. So you don't have to be out of work for a year to be considered approved for disability benefits. Processing an application for disability benefits typically takes 3 to 5 months. Now that is different if you have a compassionate allowance listing, a CAL as it's called. In many cases, if you do have advanced stage conditions such as stage 4 cancer, you will typically get a decision back within 30 days. It's not a guarantee, nor is it quite frankly a guarantee of an award, but typically if you get one of those, if you meet one of those CALs, one of those listings, you will get a decision quicker than 3 to 5 months. But everyone else, it's upwards of a half of a year before you're going to get a decision on that initial claim. We may be able to process your application faster if you help us getting any other information we need. So for instance, most medical professionals, are very good about responding to our requests for records. However, if we're having a hard time getting in contact with a particular facility or doctor, and you have copies of those records and you're willing to provide those to us, that may help us make a decision faster. So we will let you know, or more specifically, the Disability Determination Service, DDS, which is the state agency that makes all medical decisions for Social Security. They will let you know if there's missing records, and we can use your help in acquiring those records. All right, moving on to the next slide. How do you go about applying for disability? Well, traditionally or typically, you have 3 options. You can file online, which we strongly urge that you do because it's the fastest way to get the claim to us. And for a lot of folks dealing with disabilities, it's less stressful than spending upwards of a few hours on the phone, or when we're open to the public, face-to-face with a representative going through a lengthy interview. The advantage of filing online is that you can start and stop and do it over the course of several days. You can get help from friends or family members. By the same token, if you're not comfortable filing your claim online, the other option is to call our 1-800 number, 1-800-772-1213. And again, under normal operating procedures, you can either make an appointment to be called at home or at work or whatever is comfortable for you and go through the application by phone, or come into the office with an appointment. Obviously, that last option is not an option available during the COVID pandemic. So moving on to the next slide. So you've applied for disability, Social Security disability. What happens next? Your application will be reviewed to make sure you meet some basic requirements for disability benefits. Again, we will check, do you meet those non-medical tests? Have you worked enough years, and have you worked enough recently? We also evaluate whether you're still working at all. If you are still working part-time and you're making under whatever the monthly limit is for the year, which is right now $1,260 gross, we can still forward your claim along to DDS. However, if you are still working and your work activity, your labor is truly resulting, the value of your work is truly resulting in earnings of over $1,260 per month gross, then unfortunately, no matter how advanced your condition is, we cannot send the case on for a medical decision until your work ceases at that level. So even if you were diagnosed with advanced stage cancer, if you're still holding out and working and making $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 or however many $1,000s a month, we would initially deny the claim for the fact that you're still engaging in substantial gainful activity. Unfortunately, we are not able to make a decision ahead of time based on just the medical records, because one of the first barriers you have to clear is a determination of whether you are or not engaging in substantial gainful activity. So assuming you meet all those requirements, you meet the duration of work requirement, you meet the recent work requirement, and you are not presently engaging in SGA, we'll then forward your case to the State Disability Determination Services office in your community to make a medical decision. All right, so let's move on to the next slide and talk a little bit more about DDS, because again, understandably so, most of the public who is aware we offer disability, and quite frankly, a lot of folks out there in public don't even realize we offer disability benefits, but those who know we offer them assume, quite frankly, that the person who takes their claim is likely the person who will get all the medical records and ultimately make the decision for them. And that's not the case. Our responsibilities really end after evaluating your work activity. Then it is sent over to a state employee, and it's assigned to a caseworker who works again for DDS. So this is a state agency that completes the initial disability decision for us. Doctors and disability specialists in the state agency ask your doctors for information about your conditions. They'll consider all the facts in your case, and they'll also use medical evidence from your doctors, hospitals, clinics, or institutions where you've been treated. Okay, next slide, please. So how is a disability determination made? It's a 5-step process. So first question is, are you engaging in substantial gainful activity? If the answer is no, then we will move on to the next criteria, which is your medical condition severe? Oftentimes, if it is deemed severe, that will result in an award. However, if it's not, then we move on to the next question of, does your impairment meet or medically equal a listing? So basically, believe it or not, the state caseworkers are truly working with books full of listings of different medical conditions and whether or not they meet a severity criteria to allow us to approve you for benefits. So depending on that evaluation, they may have to move on to the next question, which is, can you do the work that you did before? And if you are not capable of doing the work you did in the past, at least at a substantial gainful activity level, then the last question they ask is based again on your age, educational background, work experience, job skills you picked up, and the severity of your condition. Can you do any other type of work? And if you get to that stage and the answer to that last question is no, this person can't do the work they did in the past, and they can't do any new kind of work within a year of onset, that is when you get approved for benefits, okay? So let's move on to the next slide. So after a decision is made, we will inform you of that determination. The DDS office will send a letter to you. If approved, the letter will show the amount of your benefits, when your benefits will start, and what your reporting responsibilities are. If you're not approved, the letter will explain the rationale behind the denial and tell you how to appeal the determination if you do not agree with it. All right, next slide, please. As many of you are aware, if you are approved for Social Security disability benefits, it is possible for other members of your family to receive additional cash benefits on your work record above and beyond your own SSDI benefits. I'll first talk about children, okay? If when you first start receiving Social Security disability, you have a child who is under the age of 18 or under 19 if they're still in high school, who is unmarried, that child will receive additional monthly cash benefits until they either reach age 18, graduate from high school, or turn 19, okay? On top of that, if you have an adult child who became disabled before they turned 22, if that child has never been able to engage in SGA beyond their 22nd birthday, and that child is unmarried, no matter what age your child is when you become eligible for SSDI, or for that matter, for retirement benefits from Social Security, that child will, if found disabled by the same criteria I just laid out for you. If they're found disabled, they will receive benefits on your record, conceivably for the rest of their life. If you have a child who is born with a severe medical condition at birth or early in childhood, and they will never be able to work substantially because of that, we do have children in their 50s, 60s, 70s still collecting on the records of parents who long ago passed away. So be aware of that. As far as spouses are concerned, if you have a lower earning spouse, once you either start receiving disability or retirement, once your spouse then turns 62, they can file for benefits on your record and potentially receive spousal benefits. We have a pretty easy to explain criterion to determine whether or not a lower earning spouse will qualify. And basically what we look at is that lower earner's full retirement age benefit, whatever their unreduced retirement benefit is it more than or less than 50% of your own disability benefit or your full retirement age retirement benefit? If it is less than 50%, they will receive some additional spousal benefits on your record in addition to their own retirement. However, if their full retirement age benefit is worth at least 50% of your own full retirement age benefit or your own disability benefit if you're getting disability, then they will not receive any additional benefits, even if their, again, benefit is significantly lower than your own. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. So there are some important legal developments you have to make us aware of. If you're receiving SSDI, or for that matter, if you're awaiting your SSDI decision, and you have either an outstanding warrant for your arrest, you are convicted of a crime, or you violate a condition of parole or probation, you must make us aware of that, okay? Moving on to the next slide. So working while receiving benefits. This is just some basic information for now about work incentives. We have special rules called work incentives that allow you to test your ability to work and still receive monthly Social Security. You can also get help with education, rehab, and training you may need to work. If you do take a job or become self-employed, you need to tell us about it right away. We need to know when you start or stop work, and if there are any changes in your job duties, hours of work, or rate of pay. Individuals receiving Social Security disability benefits and their representative payees must report that beneficiary's wages. Wages can be reported using the online My Social Security account. That is the preferred option. That way you don't have to call us or mail us your pay stubs or fax your pay stubs over. It is the easiest way to inform us of your wages. Again, just creating an online account and entering those wages as you earn them. All right, next slide, please. All right, so we spent some time talking about SSDI. Now let's also talk about SSI, because I know from the questions I received ahead of time that some of you are trying to acquire this needs-based benefit. So there are a lot of similarities, but there are also some differences between SSDI and SSI. All right, next slide. So requirements for getting SSI. To be eligible for SSI, you must, number one, have limited income and very few resources. So this is an additional layer of financial need that doesn't apply for SSDI, okay? Now, if you are 65 or older, you don't have to be disabled to collect SSI. You simply have to have limited income and resources. However, if you're under the age of 65, so from birth to 65, because unlike SSDI, SSI also covers disabled children, you must be either totally or partially blind, or have a medical condition that will keep you from working and is expected to last for at least 1 year, or be terminal and expected to result in death. There are different rules for children. So to be very clear, the medical criteria for an adult seeking SSI is the exact same criteria that we apply if you're applying for SSDI. It's not any easier or any harder to get SSI versus SSDI. All right, moving on to the next slide. I'm not going to spend much time on this one because it's a duplicate of what you already saw prior to now. I just wanted to include it to show you that, again, The definition of disability for an adult for SSI is the exact same definition as someone applying for SSDI. Next slide, please. So requirements for getting SSI. Number one, we look at your income. This is money you receive, such as wages, Social Security benefits, and pensions. Could also include things like food and shelter that are being provided to you by someone else. So we put a dollar value on that assistance. Your resources include things such as real estate, bank accounts, cash, stocks, and bonds. There are a few exceptions or exclusions that we do not count, which I'll show you in a few moments. Where you live is also important. You must live in either the United States or the Northern Mariana Islands. If you are not a U.S. citizen, but you are lawfully residing in the United States, there are some limited situations where you may still be able to get SSI, but in many cases, non-citizens, even though they're residing here legally, often are not able to access SSI due to some reforms that took place back in the 1990s. All right, moving on to the next slide. So there are two types of income that we look at when you apply for SSI. There is what we classify as earned income, which is your wages, net earnings from self-employment, and any payment for services in a sheltered workshop. And then we have unearned income. That could include any Social Security benefits you have access to, veteran benefits, unemployment, interest, pensions, or cash that you're receiving from friends or family. Moving on to the next slide. There are resources, as I mentioned before, that we include and resources that we exclude. The resource limit, folks, just so you know, is $2,000 if you're an individual filer and you do not live with your spouse, or if you live with your spouse, no matter how you file jointly or separately, if you live with your spouse, we also look at your spouse's resources as well. And the combined limit is $3,000. Now that limit has been in place since 1989 and has not been adjusted for inflation since that time. So for folks who are exiting the workforce, it is difficult to be considered for SSI right off the bat when you file that initial claim, because in many cases, even though I know many Americans do live paycheck to paycheck, many folks who have just exited the workforce or gone down to very part-time work still have resources in excess of $2,000 or $3,000. So what are the included resources? That includes your bank accounts, including also CDs and IRAs, any stocks or bonds or 401ks, even if you're under retirement age, and even if you're going to have to take penalties and taxes to withdraw those retirement funds early, we still count the gross amount, not the net, but the gross amount that you have in those retirement accounts against you. The value of a second vehicle, if you own two vehicles, the one that you do not use as your primary form of transportation, that second vehicle, we do count the value of that car. Any life insurance that has a cash value, so you can cash out. We look at the face value of your life insurance policy. Also, any property other than where you live. So if you have a second piece of land, if you have a vacation home, whatever the case may be, we look at the value of that property. However, the good news is that we do exclude some critical resources. Number one, we do not count the value of the home where you reside against those limits. We do not count the value of your primary vehicle, okay? We also don't count the value of any burial plots for yourself or your family that you've purchased. And we also are allowed to exclude some resources that you have specifically set aside for burial, okay? Moving on to the next slide. Living arrangements is also an important concept to grasp when it comes to SSI, because if you are approved for SSI, it will determine how much you're going to receive from our program. So it's a factor to determine how much a person on SSI will receive. Benefits may vary depending on where you live. If you live with someone else, if you live in an institution, typically your benefit is reduced down to $30 per month. Also, if you live in a group care or board and care facility, that would also reduce your benefits significantly. However, if you're living on your own and paying for all of your own medical expenses, then typically you'll be eligible to get the maximum help available through the SSI program. All right, next slide. Just like with Social Security, you have plenty of reporting responsibilities under SSI. You must report any changes in your status because they impact your eligibility for SSI and your benefit amount. If you work and get SSI, then you must report your earnings on a monthly basis. When do you need to report? You have to report any changes that may impact your SSI as soon as possible, and certainly no later than 10 days after the end of the month when the change occurred. So if you had a change in household composition, if someone came to live with you, or someone left your home and went to live elsewhere, if you changed your address, if you changed your work activity, anything like that has to be reported timely. Otherwise, you could end up getting either overpaid or underpaid the needs-based assistance. Again, just as a reminder, although we do offer other options for reporting wages, I would recommend that you report those wages through the online My Social Security account. All right, next slide, please. As you can see, there are many different kinds of changes that you have to report to SSI that you don't necessarily have to report on a timely basis if you're on SSDI, because everything you see listed here can impact the amount of benefits that we can pay. So if you have a change of address, change in living arrangements, change in any earned or unearned income or resources, have a death of a spouse or anyone in your household, if you have a change in marital status, if you were divorced previously or single previously, but you've gotten married, for instance, and that spouse has significant income or resources, obviously that can impact you, and vice versa. If you were previously married to someone who had relatively high income or resources, and they either move out of your home or you get divorced from that person, and that was the only thing keeping you from getting SSI, then it could actually swing in your favor. You could then reapply for benefits just based on your own income and resources. Also, if you have a change in citizenship or immigration status, if you have a change in the help with living expenses that you're receiving from friends or family members, if either that help is increased or decreased or removed, all those things are very important to report to us. If you become eligible for any other benefit or payment, again, generally, because SSI is a benefit of last resort, you do have to apply for any other benefits or payments that you're due through other sources, and those other benefits will typically reduce the amount paid from SSI. Also, if you're admitted to or discharged from an institution such as a hospital, nursing home, prison, etc., if you have a change in school attendance, if you're under the age of 22, so if you have a disabled child and they had certain protections in place because they were still in school, you have to let us know if the school attendance changes. Also, any changes in legal alien status and related to alien status, any changes to a sponsor's income, resources, or living arrangements. If you leave the U.S. for a full calendar month or for 30 consecutive days or more, basically if you're out of the country for more than 30 days, you cannot receive the SSI for that period that you're out for an extended period of time. And finally, if you have an unsatisfied felony or arrest warrant for escape from custody, flight to avoid prosecution or confinement, or flight escape. All right, next slide, please. As I mentioned before, just like when you're on SSDI, if you're on SSI, you have to let us know of any outstanding warrants, any convictions for crimes, or any violations of parole or probation. Next slide, please. Now, I know it's not the primary reason most of you are tuned in today, but I realize that some of you may, either yourselves, have disabled children who may be trying to get SSI, or you may have loved ones out there who have disabled children. So I'm going to talk briefly about the criteria for children applying for SSI. So a child is defined as a disabled person who is neither married nor head of the household, and who is either under the age of 18 or is under the age of 22 and is regularly attending school. All right, next slide, please. Now, here's the requirement for a child to be found disabled. If under 18, the child has to have a physical or mental impairment or combination of both that results in marked or severe limitation in functioning. The child must be either blind or disabled. If the child is blind, he or she must meet the same definition of disability as it applies for adults. The condition they have must be expected to last for at least a year. So just like with adult benefits, we do not offer short-term disability, only long-term disability. The same applies for children. It has to be a condition expected to last for at least 12 months or sadly, it must be a terminal condition the child's been diagnosed with. All right, next slide, please. Disabled children living in households with limited income and resources may be eligible to receive SSI. For eligibility purposes, the income and assets of the disabled children as well as their parents living in the household are assessed. Examples of children's income would include child support, any Social Security benefits they're receiving on a parent's record, any significant gifts they're receiving from family or friends. Moving on to the next slide. In terms of looking at the income that counts against a child's eligibility, the parent's income that counts against a child's eligibility for SSI, this is a concept known as deeming. So it applies both to income and resources. So when does it apply? If the parent or parents the child lives with has income and or resources, we must consider that as long as the child is under 18, lives at home with his or her natural or adoptive parents, or lives away at school, but comes home on some weekends, holidays, or school vacations, and is therefore subject to parental control. So a couple of important points here. We only count a parent's income and resources against the child's eligibility until they turn 18. Once that child turns 18, even if mom or dad has millions in the bank, if that child has little or no income or resources to his or her name, they can still be considered potentially for SSI. Also, if the parents do not reside with the child and do not exert parental control, let's say the kids are raised by their grandparents, for instance, then deeming would not apply. If the parents live elsewhere, they do not exert parental control, then we do not count their income and resources against that minor child attempting to acquire SSI. All right, next slide, please. Now, things change when a child turns 18. We make a new disability determination using the adult rules that I laid out for you earlier. We no longer count the income and resources of the parents for the child's eligibility. If the child continues to live with the parents, however, and they do not pay for their own food or shelter, if that is still being provided by the parent, they'll be placed in a living arrangement where they will likely receive a lower SSI payment than the maximum payable. An SSI application for an adult child can be made as early as the day of the 18th birthday. So this is a very common question from parents who have disabled children who have not been permitted to receive SSI because mom or dad's income or resources are too high. The question is, well, when can I apply? My child's turning 18 next month. And there's the answer. You can apply for that child as early as their birth date. All right. Next, not going to spend very much time on this because I realize it probably does not apply for many of you, but there are some special rules and regulations when it comes to foster children. A disabled youth transitioning out of foster care may file an SSI application if he or she lives in a foster care situation, alleges blindness or disability, appears likely to meet all of the non-medical eligibility requirements, meaning they have limited resources and income when foster care payments terminate. They expect foster care payments to terminate within 180 days of the application filing date, or is within 180 days of losing foster care eligibility because of age. In those limited situations, we can actually make a decision for them, even if they are still receiving those foster care payments. All right, next slide. It's also important to talk about how SSI applies to homeless individuals. So we define a homeless person as a transient, an individual who has no permanent living arrangement, no fixed place of residence. A transient is neither a member of a household nor a resident of an institution. If you are homeless and you can receive your SSI payments by either having them deposited into your personal bank account, and even for folks who are transient, we still encourage, if they can, they keep a bank account open because that's the safest and easiest way for us to supply those benefits. On the other hand, if they cannot maintain a personal bank account, we can have those benefits mailed to a third party. We can have a relative or another third party be assigned to serve as your representative payee if you're incapable of handling your own affairs. Or finally, you can have your benefits direct deposited to a Direct Express bank card that we can issue to you. And that applies, quite frankly, to SSDI as well. If you don't have a checking or savings account and you either can't because of past experiences with the bank, or for whatever personal reason you don't want to create an account for yourself, you can ask for us to issue your benefits on the Direct Express card. The one thing I'll caution you about, the one reason why we always recommend a bank account over a Direct Express card, is that with Direct Express, if you misplace your card, you have no access to your money until a new card arrives, and that can take a little time. They don't have the exact timeline, but I believe it takes at least, in many cases, a few weeks to get your new card. Whereas if you have a debit card linked with a checking account and you misplace your debit card, you can still walk into the bank and make a cash withdrawal. So just in general, for most folks, it is advisable to have your SSDI or your SSI benefits sent to a personal bank account. All right, next slide, please. Application process for SSI DI for an adult is the same as it is for social SSDI. Basically, you have to be between 18 and 65. You can file online if you've never been married and you are a U.S. citizen and you've never applied for SSI before, and you're applying for SSDI at the same time. You are required to file for SSDI every time you file an SSI claim. Now, with that being said, if you don't meet all those criteria, then you will have to file the claim by telephone or when we're open to the public in the office, okay? You can only file online in these limited situations where everything matches up perfectly for you. All right, next slide, please. If you are helping a child apply for benefits, then we recommend that you do call our 1-800 number and request a telephone appointment, or again, when we reopen to the public, in an office appointment. We still, though, encourage you to complete part of the process online. This is actually, in many cases, the bulk of the interview. It's filling out the child disability report where all the doctors, medications, medical testing, conditions, etc. are listed. If you do complete that ahead of time, it will make the interview itself a lot shorter, okay? Next slide. So we're basically moving on now to part 2 of the presentation. The assumption now is that you've been you've been approved for benefits, and you are now reaching a point where physically and mentally you've improved, and you want to consider returning to the workforce, either part-time or full-time. And again, I know from personal experience, there are many people out there, and that's bear this out. So I think the most recent survey we did is that only about a quarter of the people on Social Security and SSI are even aware we offer work incentives. So no wonder why so many people are so worried when they're contemplating trying to go back to work when collecting benefits. So let's move on to the next slide and start talking about these work incentives. Work incentives are employment support provisions that assist beneficiaries in moving from benefit dependency to financial independence. They're designed to help beneficiaries enter, re-enter, or stay in the workforce by protecting their eligibility for cash payments and or health care. And by that, of course, I mean Medicaid or Medicare, depending on which you're on. Next slide, please. There are some supports, some incentives that apply to both folks on SSDI and those on SSI. And then there are some that only apply to one program or the other. So we're going to first talk about the employment supports available to everyone, regardless of whether you're getting SSDI or SSI. And we're going to talk about subsidies and special conditions. We're going to talk about unsuccessful work attempts. We're going to talk about impairment-related work expenses. We're going to talk about the plan to achieve self-support, as well as the ticket to work and the expedited reinstatement process. And we're going to go through these one by one. So let's move on to the next slide. So first of all, let's talk about subsidies and special conditions. What is a subsidy? A subsidy is a support provided by your employer that may result in you receiving more pay than the actual value of your work. So essentially, if you were in a position with an employer and you were diagnosed, and because of the relationship you have with the employer, they allowed you to stay on board, let's say making the same salary as before, but they drastically changed your work responsibilities. And perhaps now you're only working at a 50% productivity level, but still getting 100% of your pay. We consider that when determining whether or not you are still engaging in substantial gainful activity. Now, in terms of special conditions, that refers to support and on-the-job assistance provided by your employer or someone other than your employer, for example, a voc rehab agency. And because of this support, you may receive more pay than the actual value of the services that you perform. So essentially, if you will tell us at the time that you apply, or if you're going through a work review and you're receiving SSDI, it's especially critical if you're on SSDI, Social Security Disability. If you believe that you are either receiving a subsidy or a special condition from your employer, you really want to let us know. It's to your benefit to let us know. Because for instance, if you're making $2,400 a month and you say, well, my employer is giving me a lot of help, and they come back and they say that you're only working at a 50% productivity level, we're only going to count $1,200 of that as earned income, which actually would put you under the substantial gainful activity limits. So just because on your pay stub you're grossing over this year $1,260, it doesn't necessarily mean, number one, you'll be precluded from being considered for SSDI. You might be able to move ahead and apply for benefits even while your wages are above that limit. And two, when you're on SSDI and you eventually reach a point where your gross monthly earnings determine whether or not you'll receive an SSDI check the following month, it's also important to let us know, because anything we can do to reduce the amount of wages we count against that limit, that's ultimately going to help you potentially secure your SSDI the following month. All right, moving on to the next slide. Let's now talk about unsuccessful work attempts. An unsuccessful work attempt is an attempt to do work in employment or self-employment which you stopped or reduced to below SGA levels after a short time, which we define as less than 6 months, because of your impairment or the removal of special conditions related to your impairment to help you work. So an example here, let's say you were diagnosed with your condition in January of 2020, and then you were out of work until mid-February. You went back to full-time work through mid-April, and then you've been out of work since that time. If you tell us that that was due to your condition, that's the reason why the job lasted for such a short period of time, even if you were making $20,000 a month, it wouldn't matter. Anything under 3 months, we will write off based on allegation. Anything 3 months or longer, we're going to have to get some documentation from the employer about, basically why the employment came to an end. But if it's under 6 months, we can oftentimes write it off, which is important, because if we are able to, let's say, take you back to January for determination or consideration versus only going back to when you stopped performing substantial gainful activity in April, that's going to allow us to pay you several extra months of benefits. One thing I have not mentioned before, and where this really comes into play, is the concept of a waiting period for SSDI folks. For those of you who have been approved and are receiving benefits, you know all about this. For those of you who are going through the process, you may have some questions or concerns. But when it comes to SSDI, we will, if we approve you, we will establish an onset date, okay? And from that date forward, we cannot pay you for the first 5 full months that follow. So if you're found disabled January 15th, 2020, doesn't matter how severe your condition is, it does not quite frankly matter whether you have a terminal condition, you will never receive SSDI for February, March, April, May, June. You would qualify as of July for a payment, but as many of you know, Social Security pays benefits a month behind. So you would not receive your first deposit until August with a January onset date. So yes, it is a 5-month waiting period technically, but effectively, in many ways, it is a 7-month waiting period from your last day of employment till the first deposit of your check. SSI is different. SSI does not have a waiting period. And this is, again, why we strongly urge you to apply immediately upon becoming disabled. Let's say you did apply for these benefits in January, and let's say you do qualify for SSI-DI while you wait for the SSDI to kick in. SSI can start paying you the month after you submitted the application, once you're approved, of course. We can't pay you immediately in most cases, but we can pay you once you've been approved. And in this example, SSI, once you're approved, can pay you effective February and can cover you through July until that payment starts in August. And not to belabor the point, this is also why if initially when you apply for SSI along with SSDI, you're denied, and let's say in March or April, you have to exhaust all of the resources that previously put you over the SSI limits just to make ends meet, you absolutely should come back to us. Even if you've already been approved for SSDI and are in the waiting period, you should come back and say, hey, back in January, I was over $2,000 or $3,000 in resources. I have exhausted those resources. I want to be reconsidered for SSI. We can then, in this example, let's say you're coming back to us in April. If you have limited resources, limited income, we can send the case back to DDS. They will, in most cases, apply the approval that they gave to SSDI to the SSI claim, and then you can start receiving benefits effective May from SSI. And again, that will cover you until the SSDI kicks in. So in general, in many cases, SSI is a very temporary thing for folks who are on SSDI eventually, but for folks who do not qualify for SSDI, they may be on SSI for the duration, so to speak, of their disability. All right, so let's move along now. Talk about impairment-related work expenses. Within the agency, we call them the IRWI, that's the acronym that we use. We deduct the cost of certain impairment-related items and services that are needed to work from gross earnings when we decide if your work is SGA. For example, we have a beneficiary who is making $1,280 per month in gross wages, so $20 over the limit. His monthly copay for his medications is $75. He's paying it out of pocket. It's not being reimbursed by friends, family, or a health insurance company. We are permitted, after he supplies proof of the copay, to subtract the $75 from his reported earnings. That brings him to $1,205, which is under SGA, okay? Next slide. Now, there are many categories of IRWIs. There are transportation costs. This is the cost of structural or operational modifications to a vehicle that is needed to travel to work, the cost of driver assistance or taxi cabs if, and only if, public transportation is not available or not accessible. Also, attendant care services, so services performed in the work setting, services performed to help prepare for work, the trip to and from and after work. If you require a service animal, expenses paid in owning a guide dog or other service animal that enables you to overcome functional limitations in order to work. Any medical devices that you're paying for out of pocket. So these include wheelchairs, dialysis equipment, pacemakers, respirators, traction equipment and braces, prosthetics. We're talking artificial hips, artificial replacement of an arm, leg, or other part of the body. Also, if you require residential modifications, modifications to your home and you're employed outside the house, the modifications to the exterior to permit access to the street or transportation, or if you're self-employed at home, modifications inside the home to create workspace to accommodate impairment. Very common one would be your co-payments for prescription drugs. So these are regularly prescribed medical treatments or therapies that is necessary to control your disabling condition. This includes co-payments and insurance deductibles. And then there are other items and services, examples being assistive technology that people with disabilities use for employment-related purposes, such as software applications, computer support services, and special tools that have been specifically designed to accommodate the person's unique impairment. Next slide, please. So this is a really crucial form to familiarize yourself with, both when you're initially applying for benefits, and then if we're ever performing a work review. If you report you're working, we're going to send you one of these activity reports. It is very crucial, as you see on the top left-hand corner, that you do mark off any special conditions or subsidies that you're receiving. You list the employer name, you let us know when you're receiving the special condition, and you describe the special condition to the best of your ability. And then on the bottom, you see the section where you list any out-of-pocket expenses that you're paying towards your IRWIs, okay? I will tell you from experience reviewing these reports, so many people gloss over this part of the report. They just don't fill it out, and they don't realize how crucial it is to potential, A, award of benefits if they're applying for the first time, or two, for the potential continuation of their benefits if they're in a period where whether or not they're performing SGA will determine whether they get paid a Social Security benefit, it really is critical to fill this out as completely as possible. You can only help yourself by filling these out as completely as possible. All right, on to the next slide, please. Now we'll talk about the work incentive that I think is perhaps, in my opinion, the most overlooked out there. It is called the Plan to Achieve Self-Support, otherwise known as the PASS. It is an SSI provision to help individuals with disabilities return to work. If you receive SSI, or very critically, if you could qualify for SSI after setting aside income, perhaps SSDI income, or resources so that you may pursue a work goal, you could benefit from the PASS. So how does the PASS help someone return to work? We, of course, base SSI eligibility and payment amounts on income and resources. And we've listed those sources of income and resources before. A PASS lets a disabled individual set aside money and things he or she owns to pay for items or services needed to achieve a specific work goal. The objective of the PASS is to help disabled individuals find employment that reduces or eliminates SSI or SSDI benefits. All right, next slide, please. Now, you can use your PASS to pay for any number of different kinds of expenses. So we're talking school or training expenses, tuition, fees, books and supplies, uniforms, special clothing, safety equipment and tools, attendant care of child care expenses, transportation for work, employment services such as a job coach, or supplies to start a business. So yes, this applies to individuals interested in becoming self-employed as well. Next slide, please. So let me lay out for you just why it is so critical to pursue this PASS if you are in certain scenarios, okay? So here's one example, wages being excluded under an approved PASS. We have Billy. Billy wants to go to school to become a social worker. Billy works part-time and earns $665 per month. We figure Billy's countable income using the earned income formula, which I'll go into depth with you in a little bit. But bottom line is, when you're on SSI, the first $20 of income that you have from any other source does not reduce your SSI payment, okay? So we subtract that 20 out. That leaves 645 that may be potentially countable against the SSI. If you are receiving earned income, the first $65 of earned income does not count against SSI either. So that leaves Billy with $580 of countable income. We divide that figure in half, and that's $290 that generally will be deducted from Billy's SSI benefit. So you can see the impact this is going to have on his benefit. It takes him from the maximum, which is in 2020, $783. And just to clarify, this is the maximum SSI payment. The maximum SSDI payment is in excess of $2,000. But again, this is SSI. So we would have to reduce Billy's SSI from $783 down to $493 a month due to his part-time work. However, Billy agrees to spend this $290 on his education, and we approve his PASS. We set aside this income, and his SSI increases back to $783 a month, even though he continues to earn $665 per month. So basically, it allows Billy to get the maximum SSI even while he is making some part-time earnings, because he's using the portion of the earnings that would usually reduce his SSI to pursue his work goal. Okay, next slide, please. Here's another example of someone actually on SSDI, not SSI, but SSDI. A lot of people assume only folks on SSI can be considered for a PASS, but that's not the case. So we have Maria. She wants to go to school and become paralegal. Maria receives $800 a month in SSDI benefits. Maria's employment goal needs to be expected to generate enough income to eliminate SSDI. So she has to be expected to eventually earn over $1,260 per month when she achieves her work goal. Maria determines she needs $780 per month for tuition, books, and school supplies. We can deduct the $780 in school expenses from her SSDI benefit and deduct the remaining $20, which is the general SSI exclusion, so that SSDI benefit is not in any way countable income. So on top of continuing to receive the $800 in SSDI, which she is using to pay for her tuition, books, and school expenses, she will also be approved to receive the maximum SSI of $783. So essentially, folks, her income from Social Security all but doubles because she's been approved for a pass. So again, it's a very valuable incentive. Very few people know about it. And if you think it might apply to you or a loved one that you know who's in this situation, please make them aware of that, okay? Because what they can then do is work on this pass. They do have to fill out some forms for us that will be sent in Social Security. We will determine whether or not we can approve it. If we do, they can start using it immediately. If we deny the application, it probably means that it's not a solid enough plan to lead to a specific work goal. And then we can work with her and explain how the pass request can be improved, okay? Next slide, please. So we also offer the Ticket to Work program. So whether you're on Social Security or on SSI, you can get help with training and other services that you need to go to work at no cost. Most disability beneficiaries are eligible to participate in the Ticket to Work program and can select an approved provider of their choice who can offer the kinds of services they need. So for more information, I really urge you, if you don't already have an active Ticket to Work in place, if you're on benefits, that you do visit that website, which is choosework.ssa.gov/about/index.html. In many cases, if you do have an active Ticket to Work and you are making progress towards a goal with that Ticket to Work, it will also, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, it will protect you from having a medical continuing disability review performed. I know that's a question that some of you were asking ahead of time, is do we review cases and how frequently do we review cases? We, regardless of whether you do or do not return to work, we are required by law to contact you and get updated medical information every 3 to 7 years. If your condition is not expected to improve, you're going to be put into that 7-year category, 5 or 7-year category. If your condition is expected to improve, your case will be reviewed every 3 years. So you'll have to fill out documents for us. We'll have to contact your doctors and basically see, has there been a significant improvement to your condition, and are you now able, even if you're not currently, are you able to engage in substantial gainful activity? Again, by having an active Ticket to Work and not just asking for it a name, but really putting the work in through the program, that will oftentimes protect you again from us performing one of those medical reviews. So again, I encourage everyone on SSI and SSDI who has any intention of trying to go back to work to reach out and get one of these tickets to work. All right. The last slide we're going to cover that, again, is an incentive for both those on SSI and SSDI, is the EXR. So next slide, please. So what is an EXR? EXR is your safety net if your cash benefits end, not because of medical improvement, but rather because of your work. If you make less money or you have to stop working because of your disability, we may be able to restart your benefits immediately if you stop working above the SGA level and your disability is the same or is related to your current disability that you were approved for in the past, and you make your request within 5 years of when your benefits came to an end because of your work. So how does the EXR help you? The EXR provision allows you to receive up to 6 months of temporary cash benefits while we conduct a medical review to decide if we can reinstate your benefits on a long-term basis. You may also be eligible for Medicare and Medicaid during this provisional period. So I will tell you from experience that when a person comes to us and they meet all these criteria, basically what we provide is a choice to the individual. We tell them that they can request a reinstatement and receive up to 6 months of temporary cash payments while they wait, or they can file a brand new claim where they will not receive payments while the review is pending. The main reason a person would choose a new initial claim over a reinstatement is if they value their Medicare, or in some cases Medicaid, but always Medicare eligibility more than the 6 months of temporary cash we can pay. Because the only downside, folks, to the reinstatement is in the relatively unusual cases where the request is not ultimately approved. Not only does the temporary cash come to an end, but you also lose your Medicare immediately. So if you cannot afford to lose your Medicare, if you don't have it through employment or a spouse's or a domestic partner's employment, if your only access to health insurance is through Medicare, and you know if you lose it and you go through the Affordable Care Act, that the cost of your care will be a lot more expensive, there might be a rationale to say, you know what, I'm going to turn away that temporary cash. I'm just going to file a brand new claim, because even if that brand new claim is denied, you will get to keep your Medicare generally for an extensive period after that time. And I'll cover that more when we go through the Social Security specific incentives. That continuation of Medicare is one of those. And that is not to encourage you or discourage you from filing a reinstatement request over an initial claim or vice versa. In my own personal experience, they're not common, these situations, but I handled a few dozen in my claims taking experience. The majority of folks did choose the reinstatement because, frankly, they needed the cash immediately. But I did have a few people who said, you know what, my Medicare is so valuable to me, I can't lose it. I can't, contemplate losing that health insurance. Therefore, I'm going to file a brand new claim instead of a reinstatement. We are not here to advise you which way to go. For everyone, their circumstances are different, but we are supposed to have the conversation with you. We are supposed to explain you have an option. We're not supposed to just tell you it's one way or the other. And actually, we are supposed to have you document in writing that we've had that conversation and you've decided to go one way or the other, okay? All right, next slide, please. Let's talk briefly now about supports that are only available to folks who are on SSDI. So if you're on SSI, by all means, still pay attention to this, but this does not apply to you if you're only receiving SSI versus SSDI. So there are 4 supports I'm going to talk about in this period, during this section of the presentation. One is the trial work period. The other is the extended period of eligibility. Then we have the continuation of Medicare coverage, which I alluded to earlier. And we have Medicare for persons with disability who work. So next slide. Let's first talk about the trial work period. Okay, this is the first incentive that many folks encounter when they're on SSDI. Basically, you are permitted on SSDI to return to work and make as much as you possibly can for 9 months. You don't have to use these up consecutively. We're always evaluating your work on a 60-month rolling period, okay? But for those 9 months that you're working, it does not matter how much you make, you will receive your full SSDI payment along with your full pay. Now, in 2020, any month in which you earn $910 in gross wages or more, or if you're self-employed, any month in which you are working 80 hours or more, that is considered a trial work period month. Now, by the same token, if you're making less than $910 gross in a month, or if you're self-employed and you're working less than 80 hours, it doesn't even count as a trial work period month. You get to save those trial work period months from when you're engaged in more substantial employment, okay? You cannot begin before the month of entitlement or the month of filing, whichever is later, okay? So just keep that in mind. All right, next slide, please. You are not eligible for disability payments or a trial work period if you work at a substantial gainful level within 12 months of the start of your impairment and before we approve your claim for disability benefits. So basically, if you return to work prior to us making a decision and it's within 12 months of your onset, that's going to ultimately lead to your claim that's pending being denied for your return to work, okay? It is possible for your benefits to stop due to your medical recovery before the end of your trial work period. So just because you're in a trial work period, it doesn't necessarily shield you from a medical review. So keep that in mind as well. We do not apply work incentive rules when determining the service months in your trial work period. Okay, next slide, please. After you complete your trial work period, your extended period of eligibility begins immediately. These are the first 36 months, excuse me, of the extended period of eligibility is your re-entitlement period. During the re-entitlement period, if work or monthly earnings fall below SGA levels, benefits are payable. However, if your work or monthly earnings are above substantial gainful activity levels, your benefits are suspended. The extended period of eligibility ends the later of either the month before the first month of SGA earnings after the re-entitlement period, that first 36 months, or the second month after the month of disability cessation due to substantial gainful activity. All right, next slide. Now let's talk about the cessation month and the grace period. The cessation month is the first month work or monthly earnings exceed SGA after the end of the trial work period. And the grace period is the 2 months immediately following the cessation month. Take a note here, benefits are paid for the cessation month and the grace period, whether or not you are earning over SGA. Okay, next slide, please. Then we have another concept to discuss, which is the benefit termination month. When an SGA cessation occurs within the first 36 months of the extended period of eligibility, the benefit termination month is the first month of SGA after the re-entitlement period. So we do not terminate benefits until you start engaging in substantial gainful activity after those 36 months of protection. So in this example, substantial gainful activity is performed in the 16th, the 17th, and the 42nd month of the extended period of eligibility. So month 16 is your cessation month, and then months 17 and 18 are your grace period months. And then your benefits in this example would terminate immediately upon performing substantial work in that 42nd month. So you're outside of your re-entitlement period, you used up your cessation and grace period months during the reinstatement period. That means that re-entitlement period, that means that that first month that you're outside that 3-year protection period is when your benefits would terminate. There's a second example though, which is quite typical. When the SGA cessation occurs in or after the 36th month of the extended period of eligibility, then the benefit termination month is the 3rd month after the cessation month. So as an example, if you perform SGA in the 36th month of your extended period of eligibility for the first time, this is the first time you performed SGA, then the 36th month is your cessation month. Months 37 and 38 are grace period months where you will continue to be paid for that period. And then finally, month 39 is your benefit termination month. So when your benefits terminate based on work activity really does depend upon when you engage in the substantial gainful work activity. All right, next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, we can generally continue your Medicare coverage even after the cash benefits are terminated. Most beneficiaries who work will continue to receive at least 93 consecutive months of Part A. Part B, if you choose to enroll, Part B is optional, though it's encouraged if you need it as your primary health insurance, as well as your Part D prescription drug coverage if you need that for payments of prescriptions and you are enrolled. Now, there is no premium for Part A, but as all of you who are on Medicare know, there are premiums for Part B and Part D. So this 93-month period of protection of Medicare starts the month after the last month of the trial work period. So essentially, folks, the 93-month countdown starts the first month of your extended period of eligibility. So to qualify for this, a beneficiary must already have Medicare and must be working at a substantial gainful activity level, but their conditions must not have improved medically. So basically, the only reason why your benefits are terminating is that despite your medical conditions, which have remained at the same severity level throughout, you have managed to go back to work at a substantial level. All right, next slide, please. As far as Medicare for persons with disabilities who work, after that premium-free Medicare coverage, that 93-month period, eventually comes to an end due to work, a disabled individual may continue Medicare coverage as long as he or she remains medically disabled and they choose to pay for this coverage. So to qualify, the individual must be under 65. They must have continue to have a disabling condition, and Medicare must have stopped due to work, not because of medical improvement. Now, Medicare Part A is available and is quite expensive. When you don't qualify for free Medicare Part A, it is $458 per month, whereas Part B will be the same price that you pay while you have coverage through active payments of Social Security benefits. That premium is currently $144.60 per month. All right, next slide, please. So last section here that we're going to be focusing on is the SSI-only employment support. So again, if you're on SSDI, these do not apply to you. These apply to folks who are on SSI. So this includes the earned income exclusion, which I've already talked about briefly. It includes the special student earned income exclusion for folks who are under 22 and still in school. It includes the special SSI payments for persons who work. It's called 1619A. And also Medicaid while working, which is referred to as the 1619B provision. So next slide, please. As far as the earned income exclusion is concerned, SSA does not count the first $65 of the earnings received in a month, plus 1/2 of the remaining earnings. These are excluded from offsetting SSI. This means we count less than 1/2 of earnings when we figure the SSI payment amount. We apply this exclusion in addition to the $20 general income exclusion, which applies regardless of whether the income is earned or unearned. So we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So if you're under 22 and you're regularly attending school, we don't count up to $1,900 of your earned income per month when we figure the SSI payment amount. Now, there's a caveat here, and that is there is a cap on how much can be excluded on an annual basis. So the cap is $7,670, which means you can basically earn up to the cap for close to 4 months before you run into this cap, the annual cap. Regularly attending school means either one of the following: that you're in college or university for at least 8 hours a week, you're in grades 7 through 12 for at least 12 hours a week, or you're in a training course to prepare yourself for employment for at least 12 hours a week or 15 hours a week if the course involves shop practice, or less time than indicated above for reasons beyond the student's control, typically because of illness, or if you're homeschooling, if instructed in grades 7 to 12 for at least 12 hours a week. All right, next slide. Property essential to support, to self-support, excuse me. Property essential to self-support. We talked about the past, now I'll talk about the test. How does the test help you? We do not count some resources that are essential to your means of self-support when we decide your continuing eligibility for SSI. And again, I'm not going to belabor this point because I know it probably doesn't apply to most, if any of you, but for instance, if you owned a small plot of land and the plot of land was purely to grow a garden for yourself, and you were using that garden to supply yourself and your family with food, and obviously you need food to work, then the value of that small plot of land would likely not count against you as a resource. So again, it's not the most commonly invoked work incentive out there, but if you happen to be on SSI and you happen to have some property that's essential to your self-support, we may be able to exclude its value from the usual resource limits. Okay, next slide. Now we'll talk about the special SSI payments for persons who work. Again, this is referred within the agency as the 1619A provision. You can receive SSI cash benefits even when earned income is at the SGA level. This provision eliminates the need for a trial work period or extended period of eligibility on SSI. To qualify, you have to have been eligible for SSI payment for at least 1 month before you resume SGA level of work. You must still be disabled, and you must still meet all of our eligibility rules, including the income and resource test. So depending on how much you're making above the SGA limits based on the general and the earned income exclusion, a portion of your wages is still going to offset a significant part of your SSI. But you could, for instance, be making $1,400 a month and still get some cash from the SSI program on a monthly basis. And we will never terminate your SSI simply because you're engaging in substantial gainful activity. Again, SGA is not really a concept that applies to SSI after your initial approval. So under 1619A, a beneficiary can receive their gross income from wages and SSI payment as well as Medicaid, all right? And speaking of Medicaid, let's move on to the next slide. This is the last major class of special incentives available to folks who are on the SSI benefits. So how does this work? Your eligibility for SSI will continue for as long as you meet the basic eligibility requirements and the income and resource test. We will continue to figure your SSI payment amount in the same way as before. If your state provides Medicaid to persons on SSI, you will continue to be eligible for Medicaid. Now, each state has a Medicaid threshold, so it varies throughout, and it's very easy to find online. You can just type in, Medicaid threshold 2020 1619B, and you're going to find a chart showing your state's threshold. Do you need to apply? You do not need to file a special application, but you do need to keep us up to date on your work activity. So basically, this is for folks who need the Medicaid, whose income is too high to continue receiving SSI. All right, next slide, please. All right, so just to carry on, talk a little bit more about this Medicaid while working provision. After you return to work, Medicaid coverage can continue even if your earnings become too high for an SSI cash payment. To qualify, a beneficiary must meet all of the following. You had to have been eligible for SSI cash payments for at least 1 month. You'll be eligible for cash payment except for your earnings, so your benefits are not being terminated because of medical improvement. Therefore, you're still disabled. You meet all the other eligibility rules, including the resource test. You need Medicaid in order to work. You have gross earned income that is insufficient to replace SSI, Medicaid, and any publicly funded attendant care. And as you can tell, that calculation is different from state to state. Last year in Delaware, basically if you had gross earnings under $44,741, you were able to maintain your Medicaid. And as of the last time I checked, the 2020 figure had not been calculated yet. Typically, these thresholds increase rather than decrease. So for the Delawareans who are listening today who happen to be in this boat, if your SSI has ceased due to your cash benefits only, then you can keep your Medicaid as long as your gross earnings are under $44,741. All right, on to the next slide. So reinstating SSI eligibility without a new application. If you've been ineligible for SSI payments due to your work, you might be able to restart your SSI cash payments again at any time without a new application. If you've been ineligible for SSI and or Medicaid for any reason other than work or medical recovery, you may be able to restart your SSI cash payment and or Medicaid coverage within 12 months without a new application. When your situation changes, therefore you should contact us right away and ask about how you can restart your SSI benefits and or Medicaid. All right, next slide. There is a special SSI rule for blind people who work. Basically, the rule allows a blind person to exclude from earned income all expenses that enable the person to work. The expense does not need to be related to the blindness, okay? So basically, in a nutshell, you can exclude a lot more from your earned income if you're blind than if you're not blind, okay? On to the next slide. Responsibilities for when a beneficiary returns to work. You have to let us know when you start or stop work, when the work has been reported that duties, hours, or pay have changed. And folks, this is where a lot of overpayments of Social Security and SSI come into play. A lot of people assume once you report your employer to us that we will then somehow have a link to that employer and receive your weekly, bi-weekly, monthly wages on a regular automated basis. It simply doesn't work that way. You have to let us know if your duties, hours, or pay have changed. We will not find out otherwise than from you. You also have to let us know if you start paying for expenses that are needed to work due to disability. So if initially you didn't have any of those IRWs I talked about earlier, but all of a sudden you do have some expenses that are necessary to allow you to work that are coming out of your pocket, by all means, it behooves you to report that to us. So you can report this activity by phone, fax, mail, or generally in person. You can call us between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday through Friday at our 1-800 line. Next slide, please. For wage reporting, as I have alluded to several times now, but just to reinforce it, for both SSDI and SSI recipients, you can report wages through your personal My Social Security account, by visiting or calling a field office, by mailing or faxing the information, or by calling our teleservice center at the 1-800 line. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, for those of you who are seeking to re-enter the workforce or are working and want to familiarize yourself further with these incentives, and also if you're an advocate for the disabled and you want to educate them about the help that's available as they re-enter the workforce, I would urge you to please familiarize yourself with the Social Security Red Book. I know the graphic is old, but it's updated every year. The 2020 version is now available on our website, and that is located at www.ssa.gov/redbook/. So we spent a significant amount of time talking about those incentives, but still essentially scratch the surface, because the Red Book will include additional details, okay, about those different incentives. And it all is written in plain language. There's no Social Security ease included in there. It is written for the general public to understand without having to be trained on Social Security, okay? Next slide, please. A relatively recent development has been the passage of the ABLE Act, the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act. It was signed into law in December of 2014. It allows certain individuals with disabilities and their families to save money in a tax-advantaged savings and investment account, which is very similar to a 529 college savings account. However, eligibility is limited to individuals who became disabled before turning 26. The account must be administered by a qualified ABLE program, which is available in most states. Next slide. Now, for those who qualify, this is a crucial benefit, because unlike the usual resource limits of $2,000 for an individual, you can save up to $100,000 in these ABLE accounts without impacting the young person's SSI eligibility. Money in the ABLE account can cover qualified disability expenses. Some common ones would include housing, education, transportation, healthcare, assistive technology, personal support services, and job training. Okay, next slide. Currently, 40 states as well as Washington, D.C. have established ABLE benefit programs. Beneficiaries can enroll in an ABLE program in their state, or they can choose to enroll in a program in a state that accepts out-of-state residents. So to find out more information, I would definitely recommend that you check out the different websites we have available. There are 2 that are listed on there to learn more. Okay. Next slide, please. Last thing I'll mention in regards directly related to Social Security disability and SSI disability is the concept of a representative payee. More than 8 million people who get monthly Social Security or supplemental security income benefits need help managing their money. Social Security's representative payment program appoints a relative, friend, or other trusted interested party to serve as the representative payee, who receives and manages the Social Security or SSI benefits for anyone who cannot manage or direct the management of his or her benefits themselves. We do thoroughly investigate those who apply to be representative payees to protect the interests of Social Security beneficiaries and SSI recipients, because the representative payee receives the beneficiary's payments and is given the authority to use them on the beneficiary's behalf. So for you guys personally, if any of your health situations ever deteriorate to the point where you can no longer handle your affairs, whether it be a mental decline, physical decline, combination of both, typically though it's a mental decline. In older folks, it's oftentimes dementia, the onset of Alzheimer's, whatever it may be. If you start recognizing in yourself that you're not paying your bills on time, things are getting out of hand, when you're recognizing that, but you're still cognizant of your struggles, that is the perfect time to find someone, whether it be your spouse, your child, a sibling, whoever you would trust with your money, to say to them, you know what, I can't do it myself anymore. I need your help. I need you to go to Social Security and apply to be my payee. Typically, it does require a face-to-face encounter. So when we're back to operating normally, your loved one, your trusted friend, whoever it may be, would come to us. And if possible, it'd be good for you to come along with them and explain that essentially you need help, and they go through the application. If we determine that person is a capable payee candidate and you sign off on it, sometimes we can award that payee duty that day. If you're unable to come in with the person, what we do is we reach out to your doctor. We make sure that, in their opinion, you can no longer handle your affairs. We will then send you a letter saying we're planning on selecting this individual to handle your affairs, and you're given 2 weeks to contest it. If after 2 weeks you have not contacted us, if it appears that you're comfortable with that selection, then we'll finalize it, and your payee will then go to the bank and establish a custodial account for you, much like they would establish for a minor child, where the money will be coming to them in your name. Okay, so it's not a decision to take lightly. It's not something that we don't award payee duties based on convenience. It really has to be because you truly can no longer handle your own affairs. And by the same token, I'm also providing this message to you because some of you may have aging relatives who rely upon you. And if you recognize in that aging relative who is receiving Social Security benefits or SSI that they are struggling paying or handling their finances, even if you have a joint account with them, even if you're helping them out, it is important, especially while they're still cognizant of their limitations, that you do contact us and that you do formally become the representative payee. Because if you don't, number one, even if you have a joint account with, let's say, your mom or dad, nothing's to stop a fraudster from taking your mom or dad from the bank and convincing them to drain their account. If you're not on there as the payee, you're simply on there as a joint account holder, they're not going to contact you because each of you have equal access to those funds. They would hand the money over to mom or dad, who would then hand it over to a fraudster. And also, by the same token, if you are helping your parents out and you are keeping an ironclad, hold on everything, and you're not concerned about that thing I just mentioned, the other issue is this. Every time that you contact us and, let's say, try to update mom or dad's address, telephone number, direct deposit, or you're requesting proof of their income because mom or dad's applying for some sort of program or another where they have to prove their income, you have to put mom or dad on the phone every single time, and mom or dad has to answer all the verification questions like name and date of birth and mother's maiden name and things along those lines, where at a certain point where dementia or Alzheimer's is involved, your elderly relative may no longer be able to answer those questions. And if they can't answer those questions, we cannot provide you service by phone. Then kind of like when it's a critical point and you're frustrated, then you have to come in, then you have to apply to be payee. Then you typically have to wait a couple of weeks to make that selection final. And all that time, that critical piece of business that you're trying to take care of with Social Security can't be attended to because, again, you were not put on the record ahead of time as the conditions were deteriorating, and it reached a point where mom or dad or whoever else you're trying to care for couldn't even answer the basic verification questions to allow us to essentially have them hand the phone over to you and take care of what you called about. So be proactive, whether for your own self, if you notice your own ability slipping, or if you have a loved one that you're caring for, you are primarily responsible for their finances, and you notice that their situation is slipping. It's not a comfortable conversation to have, but mom or dad, aunt or uncle, brother, sister, whoever it is, I've noticed some things recently. I think that we really should go to Social Security and have me take over the responsibilities for your account. If you can get them on board, it makes the process so much easier for all parties involved. Okay, moving on to the next slide, we're just going to wrap up here. A couple of non-disability related matters, but still very crucial matters. One is that since at least the end of 2018, there has been a massive ongoing gift card scam involving Social Security impersonators. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide where it says scam awareness of Social Security. Now, be aware of the fact, especially in these times with the COVID pandemic, with presently, as of today's date, May 6, 2020, our office is being closed to the public. We do contact citizens, generally those who have ongoing business with Social Security, by telephone for customer service purposes. So we will reach out in some cases. That being said, we will never threaten you for information. We will not state that you will face potential arrest or other legal action if you fail to provide information. If you get a call along those lines, that call is fraudulent, and you should just hang up. Do not give out your information. So right now, typically, it's coming in several variations, but the most common ones are you'll get a call from someone saying they're from Social Security, saying that your Social Security account number has been suspended, saying that they have detected illegal activity on your Social Security account, and they will say, if you do not call us back at this number and verify your information, we will issue an arrest warrant for you. For people who fall prey to this scam, they do give their personal information over. Again, this is not the only or perhaps even the primary thing the scammers are looking for. They're looking for your money, okay? So they're going to say to you, after you verify your information, disclose all your personal information to them, okay, now the last step of the process is to go down to the store and buy us some gift cards to reactivate your number or to complete the process, or whatever their script says. So you go down to the store and you buy some gift cards. You call them back and they're going to ask you for the gift card information. Once you turn over that gift card information, they can digitally drain the money off of the cards and put it into their own accounts. And once that happens, there is no turning back. There's no way to get the money back. The money is gone. There's no way to recover it. And very briefly, there was a story I read from a few months ago, a lady down in Texas, 72 years old, early onset of dementia. Her daughter was her primary caregiver. Her daughter, though, worked during the day. Her mother got a call during the day. Her daughter had not been aware of the scam, had not warned her mom about it. Mom got scared. She went to a couple of stores. She drained her life savings of $3,000, called the scammers back. And again, by the time the daughter arrived home that evening, the money was gone and could not be recovered. And one of the things the daughter said in the article I was reading is, I just wish I had known. If I had known about this scam, I would have told my mother every single morning, if you get a call like this, just hang up. So again, if there is anyone in your life that has fallen prey to these kind of scams in the past, or you think might fall prey to these kind of scams, be that advocate for them and tell them about what is going on. And again, that we will never call and threaten. We will never ask you to go and pay money to us by gift cards. All of that is scam behavior and should be ignored. So moving on to the next slide. We do recommend that you always understand the threats, and they're evolving. Obviously right now, some of the scammers are calling and saying, because our offices are closed due to COVID, your account has been temporarily suspended. This is a variation on the same thing, but they're looking for the same two things, your information and your money. So do not fall prey to that. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, we will continue paying benefits timely throughout this pandemic, no matter how long it lasts. We will not be suspending payments. You'll be getting those payments on time. Anyone who calls and tells you otherwise is a liar, is a scammer, and is to be ignored. If you do wish to report these scams to us, we do have a website available. I don't have it in this slide right here, but if you simply look up OIG Social Security, the OIG's portion of our website does have a form you can fill out. You also can try to call us at our 1-800 number between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. But again, this is such a widespread scam. Basically, anyone with a telephone number is being targeted. It's not just folks who are already on benefits, quite frankly. It's really hard to get through this number. So if you have access to a computer and you feel compelled to report the scam call to us, I would recommend going online instead of doing it by telephone. All right, next slide. And this is the very last section before I take any questions, any lingering questions you still have at this point. For those of you who have not already availed yourself of our online options, this is what our website looks like. This is our homepage currently. I recommend that everyone 18 and older, this includes your kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, etc., whether you're disabled or not, whether you're working or not, everyone 18 or older should have a My Social Security account. So next slide, please. All right. If you are not yet receiving benefits, a couple of critical things that you can use your account for. One, you can access your Social Security statement. This is the 4-page report that we used to mail out to everyone 25 and older. We discontinued that practice several years ago. Now, if you're under the age of 60, you will not receive the statements by mail until you hit your 60s, okay? The only way from 18 to 59 to access the report that includes your entire earnings history, so this is your way, of verifying that your employer has reported your income accurately to us, and the only way for you to keep up to date on your up-to-date retirement, disability, and survivor benefit estimates for both yourself and your family is to establish an account and check it once a year. And no matter where you are in your work career, if you check that statement and you see more than a year in the past, let's say 2 years or more in the past, right now 2018 or before, there is a missing year of earnings or an incorrect year of earnings posted, this is the time to contact us and rectify that with Social Security. Do not wait till you are approaching retirement age. If your kids are in their 20s and they see an error from 2018 or before right now, they should be reaching out to us now while they still have their W-2 in their possession. Then it's easy to correct that for them, okay? The other critical thing, especially, again, as of May 6, 2020, while our field offices are closed to the public, this, in most cases, is the only way you can request a replacement Social Security card. So if you do not require a name change, in most cases, with a My Social Security account, you can request that a replacement card be mailed to your address. And it takes the same 3 to 5 days, work days, to receive the card than if you went into the office and applied for it. So even when we do reopen to the office to the public, it is important to share this with your kids, grandkids, whoever, just as a time saver, because who wants to waste a half a day of vacation going into the office if they can take care of it online? So those are the two main benefits to setting up an account. Also, it guarantees that no one who has your financial information can possibly try to create the account in your name. So we're talking about an ex-spouse, an ex-boyfriend, an ex-girlfriend, someone who has enough information from your credit history that they might try and might even succeed in creating the account in your name. If you get out ahead of the curve and you create the account in your name, then there's no way anyone else can create the account, because you can only have one account per Social Security number. By the same token, if you're now thinking about your older relatives who do not use computers and you want them to be protected and they will never use an account, they don't have to create an account to be protected. The other option is to call that 1-800 number I told you about in the past and ask to have a block placed on their electronic access. By doing so, it will preclude anyone in the world from being able to create an account while that block is in place. So it's an either-or proposition. Whether you're 18 or 108 or anywhere in between, you really should be either, preferably, creating an account, or if you're not going to create an account, you should be contacting us and put a block on your account or your electronic access to ensure that no one else creates an account for you. All right, next slide, please. Now, I know many of you on the call are receiving Social Security, so it's even more critical to have an account when you're on benefits, because with this account, without having to call us or come in the office, you can change your address, your telephone number, your direct deposit information. You can, again, request replacement Social Security cards. And very importantly, this is your way of pulling up a benefit verification letter that proves both the amount that you're receiving from either Social Security or SSI, and also your Medicare situation, your Medicare eligibility. So if you misplace your Medicare card and you need to provide someone proof that you are enrolled in Medicare immediately, this is the easiest way to get that letter. At the same token, for those of you who are on Medicare, as you know, a couple of years ago, the Medicare numbers changed. They took the Social Security number off the card. If you have not done so yet, please, while you have that Medicare card in your possession, go to Medicare's website and create a My Medicare account. This is the only time that you'll need to know that new number that was put on your card. Once you've established the account, the My Medicare account, if you misplace your Medicare card, you can access your My Medicare account, and through that account, actually print out a replacement Medicare card. The alternative is to request a replacement through us, in which case it can take up to 30 days for the replacement card to arrive by mail. So again, for those of you who have not done so yet, you probably don't have your Medicare number memorized. And that's why I urge you, while you have that Medicare card in your possession, establish the My Medicare account. So if you ever misplace it, you'll have the option of printing out a replacement for yourself at home, the library, wherever you have access to a printer. Also, I didn't talk about this at length, but as some of you are aware, especially if you have other forms of income besides Social Security, you may have to pay federal taxes on a portion of your Social Security. Every January, we mail you out a SSA 1099 for tax filing purposes. If you misplace that form that we mail you, every February 1st, you can log into your account, go under replacement documents, and pull up a digital copy of that tax form, which you can either print out for yourself or save to a hard drive. All right, next slide, please. For those of you who have not yet established your account, these are the 4 easy steps to create one. Be aware of the fact that there are, I think in the ballpark now, somewhere between 40 and 50 million account holders. So every common username you can think of has been taken, but you can still use whatever phrase you want, but you have to add letters or numbers to the beginning or end of it to make it unique to yourself. And usernames, you cannot include symbols. It's all alphanumeric, okay? Password, you're probably familiar with this kind of password by now, has to include an uppercase letter, lowercase letter, number, and symbol. And again, it has to start with a letter or a number. It can't start with a symbol. All of those rules are online. Those guidelines are available online when you're signing up. But I just wanted to share those with you now. If you do have any difficulty establishing your account, the other option you'll have once the office is reopened is you could go into the office with your photo ID, unexpired driver's license or state ID, present it to the employee in the office and say, I tried to create my Social Security account on my own. I was unsuccessful. Here's my ID to verify my identity. And we will give you a code that will allow you to set up the account without having to go through those verification steps, because there are some questions that are generated through your credit report that you are asked if you're trying to do it on your own online. Most people get through that step successfully, but some struggle because old information can linger on your credit report, and sometimes the company names that are listed in the questions are actually the parent companies of subsidiaries you do business with. There are a number of reasons why some people struggle getting through those questions. So if you try repeatedly to do it on your own and repeatedly you're kicked out because you're not answering the questions correctly, again, once we resume normal operations and are open to the public, you could visit us with your photo ID and receive a code to bypass that step. Okay, moving on to the next slide. We now require multi-factor authentication every time you access your account. You can't just enter in your username and password. We also will text or email you, your choice, a code, which is good for 10 minutes. And you have to enter that code every time you're accessing your account. This way, if someone somehow, because let's say you left behind a piece of paper with your username and password, if someone saw that, they would not be able to access your account because they wouldn't have access to your phone or email account where the one-time code was being sent. So it's an extra 5 to 10 seconds to the process, but it is for your own security. Next slide. This is just showing you what that sign-in process looks like every single time you're trying to access your account. You enter in your username and password, we text or email you a code, you enter that code, and there you go. You have access to your account. All right, and the very last slide here. All right, as you know today, this presentation was primarily for a targeted audience. At the same time, I do try as often as possible to make presentations that are free and open to everyone. Oftentimes these are held at community centers, libraries, etc. When we are permitted to start providing outreach outside in the community again, when it's safe to start traveling out again, you will see every single presentation or event that we're participating in, that these are all free and open to the public, at the link on this slide. So it's www.ssa.gov/SCILA/community.htm. I know we do have a few participants who are outside the Philadelphia federal region, but it is quite a large region. So if you are in Virginia, if you're in DC, Maryland, West Virginia, Delaware, PA, Jersey, etc., you are in the Philadelphia federal region. So even if I'm not your public affairs specialist, my colleagues' events will also be listed on there. I can't guarantee you that outside the region that every single region lists these events the same way. We are given some discretion on how we advertise our events, but this is how in the Philadelphia region we choose to promote the presentations we're making and the events we're participating in. Again, there is no charge to any of these events. The bottom line is, folks, especially when we kind of return to normal, so to speak, if you have friends or loved ones that you think could benefit from either this information I provided today, because this is a typical presentation I make, or if you have folks who are, let's say, approaching retirement, or young people like your kids, for instance, who could really benefit from some knowledge about retirement and benefits for young children if their parents become disabled or pass away. Just good information for younger folks to have, to know that Social Security can be there for them and their families at any time, not just in retirement. Please urge them to participate in one of those presentations. Again, any event that you see in Delaware, many in Maryland, and the Eastern Shore of Virginia, I will be the presenter. For everything else, it'll be one of my colleagues who are all fantastic. We're a really great team. You know, any event that you go to, you'll get the same good information that you got today. So I wanted to thank everyone for their time and attention for these past 2 hours. I hope that I've answered many general questions that you have. I'm going to say right now, if any of you have any private, personal questions about your specific situation with Social Security that you perhaps do not feel comfortable voicing in front of everyone on this call, by all means, either email me at matthew.baxter@ssa.gov or call me at 302-450-2292. With that said, Erica, I want you to, when you're ready, open up the lines, basically unmute folks so that they can now ask any questions they still have before we conclude this call. Okay, so folks, this is your time. If you do not want to contact me directly, if you'd rather just be answered right now, please ask those questions now.
All right, before I unmute everyone, Matthew, could you just say your contact information again? I'm going to put it in the group chat.
Absolutely. So my email address is my first name, Matthew, M-A-T-T-H-E-W, followed by a dot or a period, and then my last name, which is B as in boy, A as in apple, X as in x-ray, T as in Thomas, E as in Ernie, R as in Raymond, at @ssa.gov. And then while our field offices are closed and we're working from home, the best number to reach me at is my work cell phone, which is area code 302-450-2292.
Okay, so I put that in the chat. I am going to stop screen sharing, and I'm going to, before I turn everyone on, I am just going to stop the live stream and
okay.